I'm joined here by my old friend and colleague, Roben Farzad, the host of Full Disclosure. You might be familiar with that podcast. Hopefully, you're all regulars, but if anything, I hope you've listened to the episodes where Robin has had me on as a guest.
Thank you for finally having me on. The tables have turned.
The tables have turned, my friend. I value your insights, both personal, parental advice, as well as economic breakdowns. I appreciate what you do, breaking down the complexities of finance, business, everything going on in the world for, our parents and the regular folk out there.
Happy to do it.
So this is a time where we need that insight, Robin, where we need that breakdown. There's a lot going on literally as we speak. The Fed is meeting. There's a breakneck pace in Washington. Actually, I want to begin there as a journalist. How are you keeping up?
What makes this market correction different from all other market corrections?
We're entering that time of year. It's a question Jews ask every Passover.
We always buy enough matzah that if we have any left over, we use it to fill the potholes in the driveway. We just use that filling. But I digress. Look, the market's the market, and it's a full-time job enough to follow earnings, to follow massive companies like NVIDIA and Tesla, but then to have this kind of wrecking ball situation where every other day as you're trying to follow, sipping from that hydrant, whatever metaphor you want to use. Tariff? No, we're going to pull back the tariff. No, retaliation. Colombia, Mexico, Canada, all of this going on, and you're wondering, why do that? Why bring so much volatility into the situation? Is there a method to the madness?
And that's the big question people are asking. One of the things I'm asked often, what are the metrics that Trump uses for success? And if you look back at it in his first term, he would watch market fluctuations pretty closely. That if Wall Street went down, the stock market went down, we know that Trump uses that as a metric for success. This time around, I think what has been surprising to folks that we talk to on Wall Street, but people who watch this, is that you now have a message from the White House saying, you know what? We don't watch the ups and downs of the market every day. We're in it for the long term, even if it means some short-term pain.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting to see. Was it the Treasury Secretary who went on Meet the Press and said, you follow invoking Warren Buffett and other people, not that they would extol a trade war, but in there saying that. It's interesting. Trump, over the course of his career, before any of this stuff happened back in the day, he was a New York real estate developer, loved the press, loved going out there, a bit of a carnival barker. He wasn't great shakes in terms of stock performance. And we know he's had several failed business ventures, but he was always able to parlay and position, master negotiator, art of the deal, Trump University, stakes, airlines. And it's interesting that when the stock market was rip-roaring, at least into COVID in his first term, he would gladly take credit for that. And similarly, you think about Obama getting sworn in as the market was tanking in 2009 at, I think, a 16-year low from an inflation-adjusted perspective. It had lost decades. It's not like in a period like a deep financial crisis and the housing crisis and unemployment spiking into the double digits, that you're going to run victory laps because the stock market is soaring. So it's interesting that you did see that spike after he was elected. Everybody had romanced this idea of just rampant deregulation, crypto happiness, and yet all of the market's gains have been given back, and you've seen gold soar and you've seen Tesla cut in half. So go figure.
Yeah, one interesting thing, and one of the questions is is this worthwhile? Explain to us the argument that you hear from Scott Bessent, by the way, a very successful finance guy who's now his Treasury Secretary. Howard Lutnick, been successful on Wall Street, now Commerce Secretary. These are guys who are very experienced, who I imagine are getting a lot of phone calls, text messages, carrier pigeons from their old friends saying, hey, what's going on here? And they're saying, listen, we are correcting, from a government perspective, some of the things that we think are broken in this economy. That an economy that is dependent on a lot of government money, an economy that, while has benefited a certain group of people, us, of course, speaking on behalf of the billionaires, right, that they speak to, that it hasn't been great for everybody. And so we need this short-term pain. We need these tariffs because we are correcting the U.S. economy. Explain the strategy from the Trump White House perspective.
Yeah, you take the grievance back 30, 40 years and the sin of offshoring and NAFTA, and go back, Mo, and post it in your show notes. All the people around Clinton and Bush, and I think when that was being signed, you saw so much unanimity around this landmark agreement, which Trump was very eager to come in and scrap and rename. And you're supposed to experience gains from trade when that happens. Yes, if you're going to see, wall haircut, buzz razor companies go bankrupt in the Midwest, in the Rust Belt, those jobs will be offshored to Mexico, to China, to other places, and you would capture the dividend of that product costing far less at a Walmart, which we know would be the fifth or sixth largest trading partner in the country. So
this is the rationale behind NAFTA, the deal that basically we create this economy that is, working in sync with Canada and Mexico.
Yeah, but he's got a great argument in that it's gone way too far. It's become a fetish. If you look at the trade imbalances we have with China, if you look at us kind of getting taken advantage of, and it goes to his core, it looks to those, blue wall states that have been eviscerated in terms of manufacturing jobs. You remember him talking at a carrier plant. We used to make these things here, and there's a kind of a false nostalgia for it, that if we slap prohibitive tariffs, these companies, a lot of them are multinationals, like, GE's white goods companies. A lot of them are Chinese and Korean companies that are exporting this stuff here. Those jobs, those products have left. But he's romancing an idea that you make it so prohibitive that they will come and build here to take advantage of an arbitrage. Meanwhile, while you've done this, and stay with me, it's caused the European stock market to soar, because suddenly the Germans and everyone realized that, gosh, if we're going to be abandoned in NATO, we have a lot of catching up to do on public infrastructure spending, on Marshall Plan type spending, on defense spending. So while the United States has pulled back, 10% this year, I think Europe is up 10 to 12%. And it's much easier, if you have a cheaper currency against the dollar, to export to us. So if anything, the companies here in the United States, if you look at the Standard & Poor's 500 index, those multinationals derive half of their sales abroad. Caterpillar, Coke, Procter and Gamble, all of these other companies, and it becomes more prohibitive as the dollar is strong against these currencies for us to export. So yeah, that's why you're hearing behind the scenes, these guys are crying uncle, their stocks are selling off, and yet perversely, with this pain happening, you've seen European companies prosper. I mean, that's typically what happens, after we've had the sugar high of Y2K, and, we just had the 25th anniversary of NASDAQ 5000. The United States stock market went on to have its worst decade since the Depression, while international was all the rage. So, go figure.
But in terms of the goals here from the Trump administration, we're going to get companies to bring business, bring their factories back here. And we certainly have seen reports, and this is, cited by the White House, Honda, Hyundai, Pernod, the beverage company, talk of, okay, you know what, given the tariffs, like, we will bring some of the manufacturing. And I mean, is there a way to reverse a certain portion of the trend of the past several decades, or has the U.S. economy moved on at this juncture? I mean, you speak of the nostalgia for manufacturing, but is there a way to bring some of that back here? Is there a way to, in the argument that the White House is making, utilize tariffs for that goal?
I haven't seen it work with tariffs. I have seen it work, in the regime of NAFTA. Look at all the foreign car makers that are building in the United States. We used to say, Toyota, I wouldn't buy Japanese. That's a Japanese car maker. Go look at the xenophobia of a movie like Gung Ho with Michael Keaton. I know it's before your time, but this is the zeitgeist in the mid 80s. The Japanese were coming here. They were taking over. Who's been bragging about the Japanese since 1989? But meanwhile, the Koreans, the Germans, all of these other foreign car makers are building in the Rust Belt in lesser unionized places in the United States. Ford, GM, Stellantis, which is the old Chrysler, which is kind of, Detroit is now not the big three, it's the big 2.5. Their supply chain is so fluidly between Mexico and Canada that where does a US car start and a foreign car end? Like it's very strange to kind of untangle that, and you can't reinvent their supply chains overnight. It's brutally difficult.
And so the counter argument then is that you utilize free trade agreements instead of tariffs, or find a way to create trade agreements that protect American workers without going so far as issuing these across-the-board tariffs.
There's obviously carrot and stick, but why would Toyota, why would Hyundai, why would BMW come and build in the Southeast, in places that obviously there's an arbitrage, there's a labor arbitrage in coming to the United States, that maybe they're less onerous rules, with European labor and firing and hiring people. But these are union non-friendly states overwhelmingly. So there's a union arbitrage. When I was at Business Week, I profiled the Subaru plant of Indiana. It is amazing. It's outside of Indianapolis. It's in these popcorn fields. It's a zero waste plant that turns out Subaru Outbacks and some Toyotas. They sell like hotcakes. And there was a 2,500 worker backlog of people. I'm willing to show up overnight and just do paint for 3 years to get a shot at a salaried position. And that happened. All of that stuff happened in the NAFTA regime. The fact that these Japanese companies came here and they obviated the whole, they null and voided the idea that something is a Japanese car and something is an American car. A Subaru Outback is an American car, essentially. All those workers are getting the benefits. All the people that are buying and enjoying Subaru in the United States, while Japan has had its labor and economic crisis, are enjoying the dividends of that. Same with Hyundai and Kia. These are reinvented brands. Same with, I think, the Toyota Camry, and some of the SUVs were made in Kentucky. I mean, that would have been unthinkable, I think, before NAFTA.
What do you make then of the argument? And clearly there's a constituency of voters who voted in Donald Trump who say, Roben, I hear you, but we're not feeling it. And I know people out there who are still looking for jobs.
You know what? It resounds. I was in North Carolina. There were whole towns that were towel towns. There were textile towns. And if you've been sold something over the course of 30, 35 years, you remember Ross Perot, remember Bush, remember Clinton, people coming in, a rose by any other name, it's a real pungent argument for you to say that they're all part of the same cabal. The kind of the Chamber of Commerce, Mitt Romney, Democrats, the elite Obamas, they don't feel your pain. They don't know what it's like for these towns to get cored out. And I think it speaks to this idea that the benefits of globalization, the error, I think, in United States policy, whether you're Democrat or Republican, whether right wing, left wing, is that there was no, the social compact should have been continuing education. What were you going to do to fill that void, fill that vacuum? You and I can travel. I mean, gosh, just take the Amtrak, the Silver Liner going down, and see how many different places were cored out. And this has then given rise to the opioid epidemic. This has given rise to a crisis in public works. This stuff used to be visited on the Midwest only, and now all across the United States. When these companies came in, when private equity came in and realized you could automate and offshore, the error was like, what did you give people? What kind of retooling and retraining did you do? And that people are right to be angry, and people are right to say, you lied to me. This is like Lucy and Charlie Brown.
Yeah, and I guess the question is, to correct for the mistakes of the past 3 decades, what is the solution? We're so far along the road. And it was interesting, actually, if you look at the political discussion of this, I think there was a demarcation point in that 2016 campaign when Trump basically, hearing people out there in a way that a lot of establishment Republicans and Democrats didn't, said, you know what, this new trade agreement we're going to do, the Trans-Pacific Partnership with Asia, we're stopping. And then you got Hillary Clinton in that campaign to be like, I agree with him on that. And it seems like that was a point where, okay, we're going to stop kind of going down the road. And now the question is, all of the damage that's been done internally, what is the fix for it? And you see, at least in the first several weeks here of the Trump administration, that something that we didn't even see in the first term, this very aggressive tariff regime.
But Moshe, maybe what if it isn't a fix? What if it just feels good? What if it's in service of grievance? And I don't want to go down the slippery slope and say it's the same thing with deporting miscellaneous Venezuelans to El Salvador. It feels good for people who've been lied. They feel like they've been lied to and left behind. And Trump as a whole, like if they feel like, I'm unleashing this boar into the elite, swamp of DC and sticking it to the system, sticking it to government workers, sticking it to people who've been eating while I've been suffering over 30, 35 years. And I don't believe that's a theoretical demo. You go and you drill down and look at these states that used to be dependably kind of union, blue collar Democrat. There's so much disenchantment. There's so much people being lied to that if you really don't have anything to lose at this point and not really anything to gain on the margin, that it's fun, a little bit like sadistic fun to watch the theatrics. I'm sorry, that's a valid valid read. And you're not that invested in the stock market to begin with.
I hear from people all the time. We try to do regular check-ins with people who voted for both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. And I ask the Trump voters, how are you guys feeling? And it's been very interesting because they're like, listen, some of them will admit, like, I don't love the tactics here. I don't love Elon Musk and his approach. But ultimately, I believe it's very Machiavellian that the ends justify the means here. That even if it's ugly, even if it's chaotic, this feels like the direction we need to be going in. And, I'm sure you know the numbers better than me in terms of watching the stock market. How many people, what percentage of Americans or actually invest in the stock market. Obviously, there's 401k plans and pensions, etc. But in terms of those daily fluctuations, it's a niche audience that's watching that.
And it is still the province of the elite. I mean, the idea of a 401k. I mean, these company jobs, when they did exist back in the day, there was a pension, there was a promise, and we know a lot of those pensions were voided in bankruptcy. That private equity came in and did pension arbitrage. This has happened time and time and time again, and that's why I think you look at it right now. Go inside your average super Walmart. I mean, one of the ones, that's the size of a 2, 3, 4, 5 city blocks. And then ask the people there, like, okay, I see what's in your cart. Look at the textiles that are made in Bangladesh. Look at the various shampoo products and everything that are sourced.
Most of your produce came from Mexico.
Yeah. Those are real gains. I don't remember what the stat was. Walmart itself would be the world's 5th or 6th largest trading partner, and a big reason that you could get. Even today, gosh, you go into a Walmart, I know nobody's buying TVs. You can buy the sweetest 4K flat screen TV for a couple $100. That's not made in the United States. TVs have not been made in the United States profitably for decades. That ship has sailed. That is a China arbitrage. Increasingly difficult to make those in China. They're making them in Thailand. They're making them in other places. The textiles, priced out of China, going to Vietnam, going to Cambodia, going to Salvador, parts of India, Bangladesh, where you still have sweatshops, and you say, these are all being given to you. The dividend, I mean, yes, the loss of the jobs and the grievance that you have, but look at the dividend, what you could fill a cart with for $50 at Walmart that you couldn't have done in 1980.
Yeah, people have talked about the flip, where luxury goods used to be super, super expensive and you used to be able to afford a home, and it's completely flipped, right? You can get a super cheap television, super cheap electronics, but ultimately when you look at rental prices, home prices, etc., that's where the basics of living have become super expensive.
Yeah, I actually, I think about the drive-through at Wendy's. I think about the drive-through at McDonald's. That has to be a price.
Number 6, spicy chicken. That's
in addition to the print of gasoline, I mean, far eclipses what the Dow or S&P or Tesla or the 10-year Treasury is doing. You go through the drive-through at McDonald's. I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's around the Easter area. Like, I'm passionate at times for a Filet-O-Fish. I want to write poetry about the Filet-O-Fish. There's just something. I know we're not being sponsored. Something about that steamed bun, Mo.
Yes.
It reminds me of coming to the United States and when Dad took me. But it's so much smaller than it used to be, and it costs something like $6 or $7, and you can't leave the drive-through without blowing like
right.
$10.
There's inflation and shrinkflation has been a thing.
So
right?
You've been hit by both in that case, and McDonald's and all of them right now are contorting to. People have in their heads are eggs. I don't need to tell you that for exogenous reasons we have avian flu or whatever it is, but whatever social compact was in your head that you always thought that eggs should cost $1 or $2 a dozen. Eggs, milk, bread, the loss leaders. And I think McDonald's extends to that. And that's kind of the fury that people who are working, going through the drive-thrus, getting this thing you could always eat comfortably for $5 or $6. And what happened? And I don't know that pulling back from globalization, pulling back from the agricultural supply chains of Mexico and Canada are not going to help that on balance. And it's not going to help the situation at Walmart or Target.
But ultimately here, he says, instilling some sort of fairness in there. And that's something also that comes up. Tariffs are not a new thing. They've been around for a very long time. And certainly there have been a number of countries, or you could go as big as the EU, et cetera, that have had various tariffs on U.S. products. So to what extent is there an argument for equalizing the playing field? If they've been doing this for years, we've ignored it, and now it's time to return fire, if you will.
Well, yeah, I think if you look at the case of China, I always say, where does the public sector and command economy, controlled economy end, and the private sector begins? If you look at a Chinese company, and I don't want to get into kind of the wonky weeds, but what is its real cost of capital? If the government has its thumb on the fingers of these loaning banks and these regional mega banks, and it's artificially keeping the cost of capital low, and on the side, also funding Manhattan Project type things into battery technology and solar and other things, that gives an overwhelming advantage. This is industrial policy to those companies against the US multinationals, which have to go by the vagaries of issuing commercial paper. They have stock market, weighted average cost of capital. Yes, they get benefits. Yes, there's corporate welfare. But there is this right perception that a country like China helps its national champions much more than the United States does. And the best way to equalize this, a shot across the bow, is to tariff the system and make them think twice about doing that. In fact, it might be more worth your while, Chinese, to come to the United States and co-locate here if you're really serious about that. But it still leaves something lacking. It's still, do you see what I'm saying? I mean, China is going to enjoy the long-term fruits of doubling down in solar, in technology. The stat that I will forever share, I can't get out of my head, was that the amount of cement consumption in China in the 3 years following the global financial crisis eclipsed that of the United States in the entire 20th century.
Wow.
And, you know, Jim Chanos, the China skeptic short seller, he went and he had his team double check that. Yeah, I mean, think about it. The Eisenhower interstate highway system, the Hoover Dam, the Empire State Building. But in 3 years, they were able to commandeer and use and build out. And now the other end of this, Moshe, is that they're ghost cities. They're zombie banks. There's a reckoning, right? There's a reckoning for that.
And there's an issue in China. I mean, they have a birth rate crisis in that country that the population is going to start to go. It's already starting to go down.
Get worse. I stay up thinking that if the countryside gets restive and you no longer, start to take millions and millions of people in the countryside out of poverty by keeping these factories at full tilt, you risk social revolution. And the way you can export yourself out of that reckoning in the meantime and dump your wares abroad. And that's where the White House, I think, has a really strong argument for tariffs. We have to protect. I mean, you take the example of BYD. BYD, the Chinese electric car maker, made huge and technology. I think it stands for Build Your Dream. That's how quaint and hokey the name is. Huge strides this week, and you could pretty much charge the car to its entirety, or 80%, in the time it takes to fill your gas.
This is a huge issue for non-EV owners. If you've heard, there's range anxiety, which is, you're watching your car like you watch your cell phone, like, oh my God, I'm down to 30%, 20%. And in many cases, I attempted this actually. I was renting a Hertz rental car. They got some EVs. And I found out, like, I sat in a Walmart parking lot for an hour and a half, just trying to get 30% more on the battery. Whereas, like, at the gas station, it's just a couple minutes. And so this innovation, if true, but from BYD, is a game changer.
But what's a game changer is the fact that they could profitably sell these vehicles for $12,000 to $20,000. And that's what Elon Musk and that's what the big three and all these people are terrified of. The fact that, we got to keep the dam from breaking. We got to keep this stuff away. But who doesn't benefit in the process is climate, or the U.S. consumer, or you're dealing with dumb cars or dumb charging more, or an oligarch who's in the White House whose stock was cut in half. Why?
Talking about Elon?
Why? Yeah, I mean, look, the iPhone, we would not have an iPhone if you did not have the Chinese and Taiwanese supply chain. You see Charlie Duhigg and others, I think they won a Pulitzer in describing that there's no way to invent this and to recreate it and produce it en masse in the Midwest. You just can't do that.
As frustrating as it is, in a time of increasing populism and nationalism, etc., we sort of all need each other. There's no going back.
Yeah, but look, the Tesla, these various other things. The Tesla, he prides himself on automation. It's not like, Tesla took over some of these factories that the big three and others vacated across the Rust Belt. I mean, maybe there's that Fremont, California factory, but this guy loves automation. This guy is not a union loving person. This is not going to create a revival of old-timey 1950s GM V6, V8 jobs.
Yeah.
That has moved on. That's moved on to automation. And it has to be both incredibly gratifying and exciting and terrifying that the Chinese have figured out a way to build it cheaper, faster, mass produce it in a way that this industry really needs a Model T badly. And that Model T might not be the Model 3 or Model S or Model X that Elon Musk had spent so much time and money and frustration on.
I mean, it's fascinating sort of as the world let China build this system and, create its cheap products, and we depended on it. Part of the bargain there, part of the goal there, and if you go back to like the 2008 Summer Olympics in Beijing, was that more openness, more interconnectedness with China would open up their economy, sort of this glasnost Soviet Union type goal that, like, oh, they're going to become a democracy just like us if we open things up. But what China actually did was utilize the best of capitalism in order to keep its authoritarian regime. And now, you have a leader for life, and you have even less openness in China than you had a decade ago. So sort of it had the reverse impact. What we thought, what we hoped would bring China closer to us, actually allowed them to solidify and reinforce, their form of government.
Correct, but you also have an iPhone in every hand, a smartphone in every hand, $30 podcast mics available everywhere. The MacBook, you can find a $600-700 one that's sold at Walmart. None of this stuff could be made without China. And to say nothing of solar. There's a solar glut going on. A great economist cover last year on we are on the verge of too cheap to meter power, like where it will be so ubiquitous, so easy that we'll be able to do things with redonkulous amounts of solar power, like easily air condition the New York City subway on on summers and everything, because China overproduced these things, because China has this knack for kind of ramping up, correcting, going back and doing things again. And this goes back 50 years to the creation of kind of the computer industry and the sharing of military technology and supply chains with private sector people. I think the biggest contract manufacturer in the world was at Foxconn, which overwhelmingly turns out these computers and phones started off making plastic switches for black and white TVs. And they've gone up and up and up and up and up in the food chain. And, Quasar TV in the United States or whoever it was didn't quite do that. And those great names from United States past, RCA, various other things that are made here are now just licensed trademarks that Chinese companies
Zenith.
make.
Wasn't Zenith one of ours too?
Zenith. Yeah. I mean, what is it called? Haier is the one that bought GE's white goods business that turns out the washers and dryers. I mean, how it's so difficult to profitably make anything in the United States. I mean, you really stand out if you're a textile manufacturer. Find me an electronics thing that's sustainably and profitably made here. And I think that's where a lot of this tariff slapping, I don't want to just say it's for show, but it feels good in the meantime. It feels like a comeuppance. After you've been sold something for 30, 35, 40 years, it's just fun to watch this when you have nothing else to lose.
So it sounds like long term here, I mean, as you lay this out, there's a lot to actually be very bullish on, to be excited about when it comes to some of these, technological breakthroughs that we're on the precipice of.
Yeah, how much can you suppress the technological breakthrough? I'm curious in the case of BYD, if it is indeed a killer app and word gets out, how successful is Tesla with its coveted supercharger network or these EVgo, whatever, these terrible, mediocre parking lot chargers behind a Kroger or Walmart that are always broken? How long? It's like BlackBerry. How long could BlackBerry keep the smartphone away? I shared the anecdote on NPR earlier this week that if you look at the history of Research in Motion, BlackBerry company, this Canadian giant that is just a footnote of history right now, the management, when it was handed the first iPhone in 2007, immediately looked ashen, like, dude, this guy put a full browser on this. And they saw their future, which was death. And I think there's a whiff of that. The CEO of Ford has spent a lot of time, if you can go up and look at the reporting, with the Chinese, I don't know if it was a BYD model or one that he got his hands on and was managing to bring to the United States. And it has really troubled him vis-a-vis what they've been doing with Mustang, the F-150. If you could charge that quickly, if you get solid state battery, it's a complete game changer. We bailed out GM in 2008. Or, Chrysler and others had to take kind of a shotgun marriage approach. This is a far bigger problem. Again, it's going to cause a bigger divide, I think, between U.S. labor and factory jobs and mom and pop who want cheaper, who want faster, who want smarter. How long can you suppress that, especially now that you have Elon Musk essentially in the White House?
How much is that this sort of thing is inevitable? How much of that is the lack of government funding? How much of that is over-regulation and making it difficult to actually build things? I mean, do we have a sense of like I've laid out three potential blames there, but like the U.S. was a leader, when it came to many of these things and building some of the best cars in the world.
Yeah, but why is it, I'm older than you are. Why is it that everybody was talking Japanese in the 1980s? Why is it that the Toyota Camry or the Honda Accord, it wasn't sexy, 0 to 60 in 10, 11 seconds, but it wouldn't break. You just changed the oil, kept the brakes, kept the tire tread, rotated it, and you get that thing to 200, 250,000 miles. And we were learning the best manufacturing methods from the Japanese. And that then, Hyundai used to be a punchline, my man. Samsung, LG, Kia, now that Kia is actually coveted, they cannot keep Kia EVs on the lot. And that's the Koreans wanting a national champion. Toyota is Japan's national champion. Is GM our national champion? And if it is, the truth is they've been slow walking EVs much more, because you and I know that their profit center remains these gigantic SUVs that they make in Arlington, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
And you could pay lip service. And same with Ford F-150. Ford needs to sell a lot of pickup trucks. And so it's an innovator's dilemma. Like, you go back to, my time in magazines was, the people would say all the great things about online and being platform agnostic, but ultimately it was about print ads. And in your line of work in TV, people would say, oh, I love CBS News Digital, and I think you got to go online and do online extras for 60 minutes. But it was all about the evening news. For a long time at the New York Times, it was all about A1 and digital be damned. And that's the problem. There's a dissonance, I think, internally.
When you're making a big buck off of the legacy thing, you're going to, take it to the end. And, like my old colleagues, all former colleagues at CBS, still selling those 30-second ads to Pfizer for, $80,000, $100,000, and making that money on YouTube would take much, much more content and much more time.
Yeah, you're not going to trade those $10 bills for nickels. But I think, GM, there was no way to allow GM to fail in 2008 and 2009 because the supply chain was so huge across the Midwest. And, why was that company saved and not so many other companies that failed in that financial crisis? And you wonder if there's any way to counterfactualize it. What if you did say, what if you had a neoclassical kind of economist there saying, I'm a libertarian, Jeff Gundlach, the great bond manager, has a quote. He says that capitalism without bankruptcy is like Christianity without hell. It's not all that compelling. You need to have the threat of death and hell and damnation and penalty to get people to do right behavior. So suppose GM and its entire supply chain was allowed to fail in 2008. Suppose it wasn't just Pontiac and Saturn and some other handful of things that got culled, and then Tesla filling that void, and then the Koreans and others. Suppose in brutal capitalism, red in tooth and claw, you had foreign companies come and buy these assets in bankruptcy, and we had a depression. What would have emerged over the last 17 years? Would you have had a General Motors if you were building that from scratch right now?
We certainly see in the airline space with Boeing, right?
Yeah.
That, like, the fact that, we've allowed the country to go down to one airline manufacturer. I mean, we just saw it with the astronauts who came back from space because the Starliner had its own issues, and thank God for SpaceX.
But you should be thankful that there's a European national champion in Airbus, or that Embraer, the Brazilians, decided to have, try to reach for comparative advantage in aviation. I mean, we'd be in a lot of trouble. And the gains, I mean, JetBlue would not have been able to start in this country without the Airbus A320, right? And if airlines just had one thing to go to, if it was a natural monopoly, we'd be in a real crisis right now.
No, you make a very compelling argument that, and by the way, it takes us back to the markets where we began this conversation, that we've been living off this high since the financial crisis of 2008 and the bailout there, that record low interest rates. If you look at just look at the index. I like to zoom out for people on our Instagram feed on Mo News, where I'm like, all right, let's look at the basically the 10% correction. The market's down 10% in the last few weeks, but let's zoom out 5 years. How about let's zoom out 20 years? Look at where the market's gone, and we've basically been feeding the market, so it's just been nearly constant ups.
And moreover, while this has happened, I like to say that the brokerage commission has all but died. The cost of being in the market and being in a stock and being in an ETF has kind of slimmed down to nil. This used to be the province of having to call your broker, Gordon Gekko style, pay $35 to $70 a trade. The spreads were fat. Now anybody can do it. Your kid, your little toddler, you could build a share building exercise. And when she's old enough, say, listen, we're going to put this $100 in for you and let it compound over time. And the numbers, if you just look at what a dollar turned into over the last 100 years currently with the stock markets compounding at 10% roughly annually since 1928, that is something that should democratize. That should be another dividend of our great American capitalistic experiment, alongside the Walmart, alongside the $200 4K, TV that you could buy, alongside the fruits of trade and Airbus and everything else. But stocks are still, it's an overwhelmingly white collar thing. It's for the 401k people. It's for the people in their 20s who could defer with some savings and have a company match. And it's it's sad to me because it's a way to partake in the various disruption. A lot of times you were kicked to the curb by that. So why not participate on the upside? And it's just cold comfort for millions and millions of Americans right now. And the flip side of that is they don't much care if the market gives back 10%. By the way, 10% is barely table stakes for stock markets. You know, when COVID broke in the course of a month, we sold off 34%.
Right. There's a 10% correction almost annually. If you look, like, you know, there were a couple in 2023, then you look back, or 2022. Anyway, if you look back, this is not uncommon, and leading to the question, which is how much of this can really be blamed on the, headlines from Washington, and how much of this is inevitable, given that we just hit record highs in February.
And what I hated the most from my print journalism career, and even into, at times at Bloomberg and Bloomberg Business Week, is this idea that whenever there was a correction, the managing editor would be like, all right, scramble the jets. Robin, call the pros. See what the pros are doing right now. I was like, the pros are not really doing anything. The pros are loving this.
Right. And by the way, their little secret, when you call them, they're like, we have no idea. But we're going to all decide that we're going to blame.
Who's the great guy on the floor of the stock exchange? He looks like Doc from Back to the Future.
Yeah.
He's a famous broker. Like, can you just hold your temples for me? Doc!
Peter Tuchman.
I love him. And then, by the way,
he's the Doc-looking guy that you see anyone out there who watches.
He looks like the Monopoly man. He looks like the Monopoly man.
And if you watch local or national news, and they're trying to explain why the market went up 600 points or 1,000 points, they go to this guy and he's like, "Today we'll blame it on the weather. Today we'll blame it on tariffs. Today we'll blame it."
But I always say that I like to create the Iranian relative contrarian index. If an Iranian relative that I barely know calls me out of the blue and asks me about something, it's my obligation to tell you, dear listener, to do the very opposite thing. If they call me about gold right now at $3,000 an ounce, a troy ounce,
if it reached your distant relative, we've gone too far. I mean, sort of. I saw this happen with crypto too. When I had like my father asking about crypto, I'm like, okay, that's it. Sell. We're too high.
There was a needle scratch moment. I'll never forget this. I was at a family funeral 20 odd years ago in LA, and somebody I barely even knew, is shoveling the dirt onto the casket and has that old BlackBerry like Bluetooth thing. What is that thing called? That old Bluetooth thing that sticks in your face that, real estate agents and cabbies wear. And as he's shoveling the dirt, he looks up to me like record scratch moment, like, Robin, should I buy oil? I was like, holy crap, that is so inappropriate. But I then turned around and told people, get out of oil. This is all the thing I wanted to talk about at the funeral was oil. I was like, will you let me eat something and comfort the bereaved here? And so to bring it back, like at Business Week, when I had all these people tapping on my window and saying, kid, you're young and you cover the markets, and I know you worked at Goldman back in the day, but my parents, they were born in the Depression, and we're going to be eating cat food in a few months. We're going to be in bread lines. I was like, well, we might be, but everything I've read in theory, and you know what? That was the perfect time to buy. When everybody is trying to capitulate, when your cousin in LA calls you from the broker's office at Wells Fargo, is like, why did my balance get cut by 55%? That is in my field where you learn to be privately greedy. And not kind of in a, hey, look at me, I'm enjoying life while you're suffering, but acting contrary. And we've had really just avaricious greed for the better part of 15, 16 years. I mean, you see so many $1 trillion plus companies, growth stocks have compounded at 15, 16% a year since the financial crisis, all at a time when we were supposed to be brought to our knees. It was supposed to be the end for us. We were supposed to be in breadlines. Yeah,
I mean, but by the way, this all reinforces some of the arguments that you're seeing from this administration again, that like people have been living high on the hog, and there needs to be, we need to be doing something different here.
So hold my hand through this. So if we do impregnate tariffs into the system, is this going to cause companies to co-locate here, over 6 or 7 months? I mean, I saw that press opportunity with Taiwan Semi in Arizona or wherever it was. But what kind of theoretical white goods manufacturer or clothing manufacturer is going to say, yes, makes absolute sense? Like I have this fantasy, Moshe, this dream of like I come up with a Haas avocado that can grow in the terrible soil of the mid-Atlantic. And it's just as good as the Mexican or California.
Because we should note 90% of our avocados, given our voracious appetite for avocados in this country, come from Mexico.
That's right. And in the meantime, even whether or not the tariffs are punted or whatever happens, Chipotle is in its right to hike yet again. Chipotle, which has hiked, missed no chance to hike prices in the pandemic. Why give anybody a chance to do anything more inflationary at a time when the Fed, which talk about today, is focused like a hawk on this terrible inflation that was wrought coming out of the pandemic in 2022. We're still trying to arrest that and not crash the economy to do it. So, I mean, there's just so much headline risk coming out of it. I always wonder about the counterfactual Donald Trump. You clearly won the election in 2024. You won it semi-resoundingly. Everybody seemed to turn red. You won the popular vote. You won every swing state. Why not just consolidate your wins and be the old Donald Trump, the one that you probably really are in your heart of hearts? Why the whole tariff thing? Maybe because there's no consequence for him. Maybe because there's one term and he's an octogenarian soon, and this is J.D. Vance's problem in 4 years.
Also, I think there's just lessons from the first term. He didn't get to do what he wanted to do the first term, that he was prevented in some cases by his own cabinet, Gary Cohn, Steve Mnuchin. I mean, it's very interesting to see how he selected the group around him and what they're enabling him to do. And also just the lessons learned from the first term where he was told, no, you can't do that. And he's like, actually, I think I can.
But, I also think another counterfactual moment, you always ask yourself, where were you before COVID struck? And I was at my son's junior NBA game sitting next to a guy, fellow father who has a landscaping business. And he's remarking on 2019. And this was during the primaries, I think very early in the primaries into the 2020 election. He said, I had such a bonkers year that I'm literally with my accountant looking for capital expenditures. I'm just buying trucks, buying things left and right, looking to buy my son a leaf blower or something that he could use to wash pavements and others. Like it was such an embarrassment of riches. And go back and look at those numbers to start 2020. Trump was intensely popular. This idea that nobody could beat him. I mean, you might as well just throw Bernie Sanders into the mix. Joe Biden looks weak. And then this exogenous shock of the pandemic coming in. And I wonder, and I hope this is germane to this conversation, in another life, in a parallel universe, had somebody talked to him and some of these advisors talked to him and say, Mr. President, you are now a wartime commander. You go at the Resolute desk and turn to the country and say, this is dead serious. I'm going to throw all my efforts at aid, food stamps, whatever it is, PPP, all the emergency things that happen in the spring and summer of 2020. And we're going to come out with a vaccine and a moonshot. And this economy is going to come back. And if he didn't fight it, and if he didn't vilify the healthcare people, right?
Oh, he would have had that second term. It wasn't that, by the way, you look at the numbers from the 2020 election, look at the swing states. Biden basically beats Trump by a couple of 100,000 votes, Robin. Like, it wouldn't have taken that much.
I wonder if he ever thinks about that. Had I run to the center, can a person become a wartime, what does it call it? A wartime leader, not one that's kind of coasting, not a caretaker president, not just a, rhetorical populist, but one who actually turns into this is serious.
No, it's during those crises where we also give a lot of leeway to our presidents.
Yes, I remember Bush after 9/11. I remember I was in Manhattan. I remember the bullhorn. I remember the ridiculous.
He could have asked us to do anything
in 2022. He could have done anything at that point, and so. I don't know. I'm surprised that, having won a second time, which would have vindicated his philosophy. And, it's one thing to use these as a negotiating tactic for the bluster and to really kneecap people before you come in, whatever his method is. But it's another thing to just get continuous daily volatility out of who we slap these tariffs on, who we don't. At some point, it's his economy, not Biden's anymore. And you can't kitchen sink it. And if this was a 20% pullback, if this was a bear market, it's just going to be far harder for him to sustain that.
Well, let's talk about that. I mean, you are very familiar with all the various banks and the warnings and percentages they put out, and it seems like on a nearly daily basis now we have a 40% chance of a recession, 60% chance of a recession, warnings of a recession. What is the sense that you get? And by the way, we saw this a year and a half ago.
Yeah,
we saw this 2 years ago.
Everybody started
where everyone was like, recession.
And people
recession
have predicted
watch,
9 out of the last 5 recessions, right?
People have predicted, let me repeat that, 9 out of the last 5 recessions. That's the way this works. Where are we this time around?
You're at a point where if you're the White House, and maybe with Jerome Powell, who was Trump's appointee, I believe has a year left on his term, you want to maintain your independence. You still see worrisome signs of inflation in this economy. But if you're the White House, perversely, you're like, well, if I can talk it down enough, we have a lot of debt. We'll have a lower interest rate on our debt.
This has been super interesting, right? It is so rare to hear a president in a White House when people say, hey, is there going to be a recession? As opposed to typically they say, no, of course not. There will not be a recession. They're like, there might be. There
Well,
might be a recession.
we called it in Wall Street terms kitchen sinking it. Intel has a new CEO. If you come in, everybody is telling you, all the investors, all the activists, put all the bad things on and throw it on the last guy.
Yeah.
And set the bar really
Call
low.
it the Biden recession.
And was it Besant who was saying it on Meet the Press again, that the markets are going to snap back. That this economy is strong. We're still creating more than 100,000 jobs, monthly. If you want to start a recession, if you want to start a panic, it could just be a self-fulfilling prophecy where companies start hiking, where people start pulling back, people start hoarding, housing stuff. If I had an addition, I don't want the tariffs to affect
right. We're a consumer economy. Yeah. Enough of these headlines will get many of us to not spend on the vacation and not spend on the home renovation.
And yet there are so many people that are waiting to buy a 20% dip. If that's your chief motivation, if the Wall Street wing, the quiet Chamber of Commerce wing who says, I don't love this person's tactics, but hey, I do love me a 2.7% mortgage from 2021. I do love me the S&P 500 compounding at 15% a year. That is, again, the bifurcation. I don't see that his base overwhelmingly benefits from that. I think that a lot of them believe that these are structural things. It's bad medicine. It's hard medicine that we have to take.
Right. That's the metaphor everyone's using is Trump is giving the country some medicine and it's not going to taste great, but ultimately we'll be better for it.
Yeah. I mean, are we going to have a revival? Suddenly, car plants being built, textile manufacturers, towel manufacturing coming
Erie,
back.
Pennsylvania will come back.
It's just, I don't, trade happened. Trade happened. It's out of the bag. And these supply chains have been refined over 40 years of automation and products changing. I mean, VCRs, we're not making VCRs or typewriters or word processors anymore. I mean, even if you wanted to, could you build a laptop in the United States? What could you possibly source and do over here? That Foxconn example, again, go back and read Charlie Duhigg's series in the New York Times. Like, Foxconn can commission hundreds of thousands of employees at the ready in these dorms, will slaughter thousands of hogs to feed people in the cafeteria and turn, like if Tim Cook says something, tweak this watch or this thing, they could churn that out. For the product cycle for the company, the largest company in the world. And there's no one in the United States, no contract manufacturer, no fixer, I think, that can do that in the vacuum of what's been left over the past 30 years.
Even I sit on a chair that was probably produced in China for a quarter of the cost that it would take to produce the same chair here.
Well, go look at the tag on your shirt, look at your headset, where it was made, even if it has a Sony name on it, look at the mic, look at this computer, look at, I don't want to sound mercenary about that. These are things that we've benefited from. These are things that we got. These are things that are made possible. You walk into a Walmart, you know what? I have many Cuban American friends in Miami, and obviously I was born in Iran. And when we have Iranian relatives that come to the United States, you take them to a super Walmart, and I've helped Iraqi and Afghani families relocate. The abundance, the availability is just mind-boggling, to say nothing of the electronics and textiles. But you can go and buy dragon fruit, mango. You can have lime at any time of the year, avocados at any time of the year because of the global supply chain. Texas mangoes, Champagne mangoes. Oh, you don't want Florida oranges? Valencia oranges, Mineola oranges. Just the abundance and the things that we've gotten used to, that if you were to slap tariffs on these things, you're going to get people, is Chipotle going to shift to Florida avocados, the watery kinds? No, I mean, you got a 2-year-old. I'm sure she's got high taste for creamy, buttery Haas avocados.
Only
right?
the best. Only the best for Olivia, child, and the avocados that she loves. You were talking about automation. We've been talking about a bunch of trend lines. I don't want to leave this conversation without talking AI and the state of things there. Was struck this week by the headline that Apple can't get its act together when it comes to Siri. I don't know if you've been following the Apple, they refer to AI at Apple and Cupertino as Apple intelligence, not artificial intelligence, but they've been having some trouble there. They don't even have a date for what, they're going to do. And they made all these promises. Curious as to, that's one storyline that we're following, but then there's the larger AI storyline that we're a couple years in here to ChatGPT. There's been meetings at the White House. There's been talk about more regulation. There's now talk at the White House about less regulation for AI. Talk big picture here, broad strokes. Roben, what are you seeing when it comes to AI right now? What are you hearing from folks?
Well, I am excited. If you take this and we'll post this video or whatever it is, this can and should be automated, right? You could take our avatars and not make us look like uncanny valley, robots, but it can upscale our voices over a cell phone line and take a sample from learning of all the various thousands of episodes that we've done and automate this and take a great first pass at an edit of the Mo News pod or Full Disclosure. Same thing with my taxes.
Hold on, just to translate that, where you and I wouldn't actually have this conversation, our AIs would have had
this
conversation.
I still would want to have the conversation because I love it and I seek it out.
I like talking to you.
Right, but if you and I were to have a phone conversation and we were okay and we'd approved our AI avatars, not the kind of the freaky Mark Zuckerberg in the meta space thing, but it's refined enough and the editing is refined enough and you listen to that speeds up your job. It actually frees you of having to pay a lot of labor and a lot of staff. It'll help the social media. It will cut, a perfect clippable thing for you and put it out there. I'm thinking tax season. Why the heck am I not able to drag all of my PDFs, all of my Excel things into a box and have it take a first crack at my taxes? We should be there and that's going to help us. But people are going to lose jobs as a result of this. I don't think my Korean barber, she's since hiked $7 during the pandemic for her cut. She's not going to lose her job. Farmers aren't going to lose their jobs, but professional services, real estate brokers, the people writing copy editors at a magazine that still exists, the art department. Do you remember what it would be to mock up visuals? There's going to be tremendous job loss and dislocation. And just like the example you and I were sharing with offshoring, if this administration and others doesn't put a plan in place to retrain people, to put carrots where kind of the sticks were, where something is being taken away from you, you're going to see a whole other shadow anger from this because it's hitting and it's hitting fast. Time was you could go to McDonald's and be a cashier, and that increasingly the AI stuff is Starbucks' new CEO is going to be there where it detects what you want. If you're not ordering on a tablet, this is going to be automated and it's going to be predicted, and people are going to lose work.
Though I also have seen, I think LinkedIn sent me a press release recently about the number of jobs available to people with AI understanding. And companies are trying to bring in people, hire special folks who have AI experience. So at the same time, people have compared this to the internet, this fear that the internet was going to completely, it did remake the workforce, but it created many jobs that didn't exist before as well.
I would hope so. I think that I know everybody's banging on your door trying to invest in Mo News. And I've been very open about how proud I am that you went from the analog world, from the fat world of TV and sitting there and, you didn't want to rot at Bloomberg or at CBS and you didn't want to just get old doing the predictable thing back when they had black car service and whatnot. The fact that you're doing this,
glory days.
You're going to be forced at some point. We had Jonathan Wald on the show last week, a former CNBC and CNN. And
the last time I went with Wald, I think, was he at NBC? He was at NBC at the time. Yeah.
He was at NBC. And he said that AI, we ended the conversation on, if I really love Mo News and you have a lot of people who come to you on Insta, who come to you on social media, who love your voice, you're a friendly voice, a companion unobtrusive, you're a Molly Jong Fast, you're these personalities who really have carved out niches of their own in the time of fragmented media. Not only do I want your personal voice and your curated thing, I want your avatar, your curation, putting together an AI crafted news update for me. On the hour, like I get from the NPR app. That is what I believe the stakes are going to be in 5 or 6 or 7 years. And investors are going to ask you, what is your strategy in doing that? Are you open to that? Are you willing to cede the control for automation? Are the IP rights taken care of? Are you not going to get mined and stripped and aped by somebody else, a competitor? I think that's where the promise and the peril is. But I would say, gosh, we have this conversation in 5 years. I would hope that it understands me enough that if I give Mo News the rights to, crawl my news consumption habits, that just with a little bit of learning, it could give me the compendium that I want with you and your staff. Do you know what I'm saying?
AI is a force multiplier.
But right? AI with your humanity, right? There's some, when the podcast updates on the thing and it feels like a warm blanket, like, my man's here, Like it's a nice little reminder, like, oh, ding, you got that thing, you got that driveway moment with that person. You have that, I have that with certain people out there in this media world, whether it's on YouTube or Spotify or Lakshmi Singh at NPR, but increasingly, I hope that large language models and machine learning will let me customize that. Give me the compendium for me, not something that's prefab that's talking about all of these headlines. You go and look at a Google News thing, it's still, or Apple News, it's still scattershot. It's still all over the place. I want better curation and better sorting, and that's where this is a lot of headed.
There's a lot of great potential. There's a lot that's scary in terms of AI, and that's where I think regulation is. I do hope that at some point we do regulate and demand that, like, if a photo or video has been made via AI, that there is some sort of watermark on it, because I fear that we'll get to the point if we don't regulate this effectively, we won't know what is real or whether that person
Who
actually
is the
said it.
locus of control for that right now in Washington, D.C.? I'm not sure anyone is the
Yeah.
champion for that in this industry. Is it Elon Musk? Is it someone at
Well,
the FTC?
what was interesting is it might have been a year ago this spring, might be 2 years ago, where you had all of the various AI and tech CEOs come before Congress, and they said, we need you to regulate us because we cannot police ourselves. Because if I do one thing, it won't be competitive with that person. So it's sort of like what you hear from the airlines sometimes, and you hear from various industries, which is like, government, we need you to make a rule because we need something that we all need to follow.
Imagine people stepping up before the U.S. Senate in 2000, 2001, 2002 and saying, we need you to really monitor securitization and collateralized debt obligations. I mean, they would have yawned you out of the room.
Mm-hmm.
And that it would have played out this way, that Wall Street, I mean, because again, there was unanimity over, well, we're extending the American dream, housing, whether you were a country club Republican or a very conservative Pat Buchanan Republican or the late Nita Lowey, you loved housing formation. You loved the extension of credit to people, that banks would never do this to their own detriment, but they did because it was the taxpayer on the hook. And belatedly, right? You remember that with Sarbanes-Oxley, Dodd-Frank, whatever, that stuff. And now that's all being stripped
Right.
aside.
So, I mean, basically, we lived high on the hog. We had a financial crisis, and then Congress has to come in after a crisis and set some rules. And now, inevitably, we're lifting some of those rules or looking the other way.
AI is due for its crisis. Sadly, I don't believe anybody's going to see it, just like a pandemic. I mean, how many people would have listened if you showed up and with a poster and shouted in the U.S. Senate or the FDA or the CDC in 2019 that this was happening?
No, it's going to take sadly, it's going to take an AI-induced riot, right? That, like, people will, like, a video will come out and they'll think it's the mayor or the president or whatever, and it'll lead to something. And it's like, oh, we have to make rules about that.
Which brings it back to journalism. That's why the trusted name, the curation, is so essential. I mean, the stuff that my friends and relatives, Miami people send around on WhatsApp and just decide that it's factual because it's on WhatsApp. And
even when you give them, you're like, by the way, that's not true. They're like, yeah, but I want it to be
and
true.
Meta now, Mark Zuckerberg saying it's not our job to police that. It's awful to see kids consume it on Insta or TikTok. I mean, a lot of this has sailed. It's one thing when you had Walter Cronkite and the golden age of people curating this, or the New York Times or others. But
Gallup does an annual poll, by the way, trust in media. And I often use this for presentations that I do for companies and organizations. And I put up the line chart of the last 60 years. Peak trust in media, September 1974, after the resignation of Richard Nixon. 72% of Americans trusted significantly the news that they get from the media. And it's just been a downward trajectory for 50 years. And you've seen collapses, particularly around 2016 and then 2020 COVID. And now we've gone from 7 out of 10 Americans trust the media to 3 out of 10 Americans trust the news they're getting.
And the news is just in an awful shape. I mean, Washington Post is pulling back from this. Washington Post, you have another, one of the wealthiest people in the world, a billionaire backstop who could fund it ad infinitum, ad nauseum. They've all pulled back from the kind of the noblesse oblige of being torchbearers for
all these billionaires, right? I mean, you saw it with Benioff in Time. You saw it with Patrick Soon-Shiong in the LA Times.
Right.
I mean, we're getting into our favorite topic.
Boston Globe technically is doing it, but the hedge fund, Arden Cat, what is it?
Alden.
I mean, it's still, they're just news deserts everywhere. And in that vacuum, you see the WhatsApp, the alternate facts, the stuff that you see on Instagram, and stuff in Instagram that's done on AI or AI voice. It's shockingly good.
Yeah.
Like terrifyingly good.
Oh, I get it sent to
It's
me all
not
the time. I
cartoonish or
spend half my day trying to
six
fact
fingers
check people.
anymore, and I gotta talk my mom out of it. I gotta talk my relatives out of it.
Yeah.
And I don't want to sound like a coastal elitist telling you to drink milk, do your homework, stay off drugs, but this is a dangerous time because the stuff has advanced so quickly. I mean, Intel is a distressed company because it missed what NVIDIA caught, which was this AI deluge, which is absolutely changing the world right now.
And we're seeing it there, and we're seeing it certainly in the media sector. Whereas, you see our friends and colleagues are, if they're not laid off this time around, they're scared they'll be laid off next time around because the media has not.
What a great,
adapted.
I turn it to you. What a great testament to you. And we've done this in the shows before, and the New York Times clearly has covered it, that you, in the weightless moment of the pandemic, just decided to turn on the phone like, what the heck? I'm going to follow this and I'm going to post this stuff. And it took on a life of its own on Insta. What was tens of thousands became hundreds of thousands. And then it started with the trust people had in you. And you as a fair, honest broker, you're not going to bring shysters in. You're not going to bring, Boca Raton boiler room people in. And that is key. It's increasingly not as much the organization as it is the person.
It's the curation, it's the vetting, right?
Yeah.
There's a premium on that. That's something AI can't quite replicate.
And as you see with Substack, as you see with YouTube, as you see, you covered this in this election. Unfortunately, a lot of people, there's no good housekeeping seal that says a podcaster has to preach the truth or has to be fact-based.
No, I mean, listen, I get concerned. I mean, Rogan is the Walter Cronkite of our generation, if you look at his audience these days. And then he'll put on a politician one day or put on a CEO one day. And then one day he'll bring on a guy who, is an apologist for here's some historian on recently who's sort of like, who the real evil guy in World War II was? Winston Churchill.
Wow.
And so a lot of people listen to that, right? So there's something there, and that's a conversation, though, for another day. Roben, appreciate you as always.
I really appreciate what you did, and I really appreciate that you're ready to run this kind of in stereo this week with my pod, because it sounds indulgent to me to turn it around and ask questions of me. But if there's someone who's going to do it, I'm happy it's you.
No, and listen, I think the full disclosure audience will appreciate having much more Roben answers than Roben questions for
the full disclosure audience is my mother-in-law, so don't.
Well, I mean, given some of the stories you told about your family, I hope they will remain listeners after this.
Oh, they don't know what I do anyway. I never became a doctor, so I'm a failure to them. I digress.
For many first generation types, it's like you're a doctor or lawyer. What did I bring you to this country for? To join the media? Yeah. What is that?
Does it pay commission? Why you don't buy a gas station for your father?
I took a moment though. I was able to get my parents to the White House, to the West Wing, and I was like, this is what, because my father, to his credit, was like, he's a cabinet maker from Morocco originally, comes to this country, creates his own business as a cabinet maker. And in high school, he's like, I know you want to go to the college and stuff, but like, what if I buy you a small grocery store and you expand it into a larger grocery store? You'll be a millionaire. And then, he didn't quite understand what I was doing. I wanted to go to DC for college, etc. And then at some point, he's like, and then I realized like you knew what you were doing, but in high school, we had the grocery store talk many times.
Isn't that amazing? And are you only GW 2004?
I'm GW 2004. Yeah.
That's when my brother graduated. And you know who else graduated then? Tim Miller of the Bulwark, who I've had on the show, and you guys have gone on to make these media empires.
There's a number of us that are in that group from GW. Kate Baldwin of CNN.
I didn't know.
Class with her. Yeah. Tim Miller. There's another political spokesperson, R.C. Hammond. Maria Camella, if you know her. The 2008 campaign, there was a group.
There was something in the kebabs in Foggy Bottom back then that got.
It's also GW attracts when a college's line is not about our academics but about our proximity to the White House. Yeah. It attracts a certain type of student.
I lived there as a White House intern in 1997. Great summer.
Oh,
different era, my friend.
Interesting time to be a White House intern, Roben. There were less headlines about you than a certain other intern during that era. All right, we're going to leave it here.
Thank you.
Good chatting, my friend.
Pleasure. Thank you.